My name is Evelyn Carter, and for 68 years, I believed I understood the architecture of my own life. I had mapped its rooms and hallways, knew which floorboards would creak with memory and which doors were best left closed. But a single event, a cataclysm that occurred on a Tuesday afternoon in the rain, proved that the entire structure was built on a foundation of sand. It revealed that the people I had called mother and father were not the benevolent guardians of my history, but its saboteurs. This is not just a story about a terrible thing that happened to my grandson. This is a story about inheritance. Not of money or property, but of silence, of pride, and of a love so twisted by possession that it became a weapon. It all began with a teapot. A simple, seemingly innocuous thing. A Royal Albert bone china teapot with a pattern of pale pink roses and gilded edges, nestled in a worn velvet box. It had belonged to my grandmother, then my mother, and for my entire life, it had sat on a shelf in our family home in a quiet, tree-lined suburban neighborhood in Ontario, Canada, a silent symbol of continuity. My mother, Eleanor, was a woman for whom objects were not just objects. They were vessels for legacy, for status, for control. That teapot was her Excalibur. My own life had been a quiet one. I married my husband, Arthur, a gentle schoolteacher, and we built a modest, happy existence in a small bungalow just a few miles from my parents. We had one son, David, our greatest joy. He grew into a bright, kind man, an engineer who married a wonderful woman named Sarah. Their greatest gift to us was our grandson, Leo. Leo was 8 years old, a boy with his father's curious eyes and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. Arthur and I doted on him. He was the shimmering thread that connected our past to our future. Then, the unthinkable happened. 2 years ago, a car accident, sudden and brutal, stole David and Sarah from us. The world shattered. The color drained from everything. The only light left was Leo. Arthur and I, hollowed out with a grief that felt like a physical weight, did not hesitate. We became Leo's legal guardians. Our quiet bungalow, which had felt so empty, was now filled with the heartbreaking sounds of a little boy trying to understand a world without his parents. We were old, yes. Our bones ached in the morning and our energy wasn't what it used to be, but we had love. We had a duty. We had Leo. My parents, Harold and Eleanor, were of a different generation. Stiff, proper, their emotions were kept under lock and key, polished like the silver. They grieved, of course, but their grief was quickly overshadowed by a cold, hard pragmatism. They began to visit more frequently, their conversations laced with a new and unsettling theme. "Evelyn, you have to be practical," my mother would say, her voice a low, insistent whisper as she watched Leo playing in the garden. "You and Arthur are not young. What if something happens to you? The strain of raising a child at your age, it's immense. We've found an excellent boarding school in Switzerland. It would provide him with structure, a first-class education. It's the best thing for him." The suggestion felt like a betrayal. Send him away? Mother, he's just lost everything. He needs his family. He needs us. Sentimentality is a luxury you cannot afford, my father would intone, not looking up from his newspaper. Think of his future. We are. But it wasn't about his future. I could feel it. It was about the past. It was about the narrative they had constructed for our family, a narrative that did not include 2 elderly grandparents raising a traumatized boy in a small bungalow. It was messy. It was undignified. And I slowly began to realize it was an inconvenience to their own carefully curated plans for their twilight years. The tension grew, thick and cold, like an ice sheet forming between us. Visits became strained affairs, filled with pointed comments about Leo's schooling, his friends, the fact that our home wasn't in the right neighborhood. Arthur, usually so placid, would clench his jaw and find a reason to go to the hardware store. I felt like a rope in a tug-of-war, with my son's memory on one end and my parents' disapproval on the other. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. It was raining, a steady, gray drizzle that matched the mood inside our home. Leo was upstairs in his room, working on a model airplane. Arthur was at a doctor's appointment. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find my parents standing on the porch, looking unusually formal. My mother was holding the velvet box. "Evelyn, we need to speak with you," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. I ushered them into the living room. They sat primly on the sofa, while I took Arthur's armchair. The teapot box sat on the coffee table between us, a silent, ominous presence. "We are leaving," my father announced. "Leaving?" "On a trip. Permanently," my mother clarified. "We've purchased a luxury apartment in a retirement community in Florida. It's a managed facility. They take care of everything. It's what we've always wanted." My heart began to pound. "Florida? But that's so far away." "That is the point, Evelyn," my mother said, her gaze steady. "We have worked hard our entire lives. We deserve a comfortable, carefree retirement. But we cannot leave with this situation hanging over us." "Situation?" I whispered, the word catching in my throat. "Leo," my father said, his voice blunt. "We have arranged everything. The school in Switzerland has a place for him, starting next semester. The fees are paid. All you need to do is sign the papers. We will handle the transition. It is the only sensible path forward." I stared at them, my own parents, and saw not concern, but a cold, ruthless determination. They were not offering a choice. They were issuing an ultimatum. The room seemed to tilt. I thought of David. I thought of Sarah. I thought of Leo's small hand in mine, the trust in his eyes. "No," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "The answer is no. He is not a situation to be managed. He is our grandson. He is our son now. This is his home. We are not sending him away." My mother's face hardened. She leaned forward and opened the velvet box. The teapot gleamed under the lamplight. "This teapot has been in our family for 4 generations, Evelyn. It represents a legacy of strength, of making the right decisions, no matter how difficult. It was meant for you. It is your inheritance. But inheritance comes with responsibility. The responsibility to uphold the family's standards." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "If you refuse to do what is best for that boy, if you choose this sentimental folly, then you are not the daughter we raised. You are not fit to be the custodian of this family's legacy. You will get nothing from us. Not this teapot. Not a single penny. And you will be on your own." There it was. The final, stark choice. My grandson, or a symbol of a family that was now showing itself to be a hollow fiction. I looked from the cold beauty of the roses on the china to the cold resolve in my mother's eyes. I thought of Arthur, of the life we had built, of the love that was real and tangible, not stored in a box. I stood up. My legs felt weak, but my resolve was iron. "Get out," I said, my voice low. My father's eyes widened. "Evelyn, be reasonable." "Get out of my house," I repeated, my voice rising. "You are asking me to choose between a piece of china and my grandson's heart. There is no choice. Leo stays. Now, please leave." My mother stared at me for a long, terrible moment. Then, slowly, she closed the lid of the velvet box. She stood, her posture rigid with outrage. Without another word, they turned and walked out of my living room, out of my life. The front door clicked shut, and the house was silent, save for the soft patter of rain and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I had chosen Leo. I had no idea that my choice had just set in motion a chain of events that would break my heart into 1,000 pieces. The silence after my parents left was profound. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was a vacuum, heavy with the echo of their ultimatum. I stood in the living room for a long time, just staring at the door, half expecting them to return, to apologize, to say it was all a terrible mistake. But the only sound was the relentless drumming of the rain against the window pane. I felt a strange cocktail of emotions, a fierce, defiant pride at having stood up for Leo, and a deep, cavernous sorrow for the parents I had just lost. It felt like a death. When Arthur came home, his coat damp from the rain, I told him everything. I watched the color drain from his face, saw the way his shoulders slumped as he sank into his chair. He was a man of peace, my Arthur, and conflict of any kind pained him deeply. "Oh, Evie," he sighed, reaching for my hand. His grip was warm and solid, an anchor in the sudden storm. We knew they were stubborn, but this This is monstrous. To threaten us over a child. Their own great-grandson. They gave me a choice, Arthur. The teapot or Leo. He looked at me, his eyes full of a sad, weary love. There was never a choice, my dear. There was only ever Leo. We decided not to tell Leo about the confrontation. He had endured enough upheaval. He didn't need to know that his great-grandparents saw him as an inconvenient situation. We carried on. We packed his lunch for school, helped him with his homework, read him stories at night. Life, in its fragile, new shape, continued. But a shadow had fallen over us. I found myself looking over my shoulder, jumping when the phone rang, my nerves constantly on edge. The peace of our small bungalow had been violated. A week passed. Then another. There was no word from my parents. I tried to call them once, my finger trembling over the buttons on the phone, but the line had been disconnected. They were gone. They had truly left for Florida, cutting the cord with a finality that was breathtaking. A part of me grieved, but a larger part was too busy being afraid. What did "you will be on your own" truly mean? The answer came on a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after their visit. It was raining again, a hard, cold autumn rain that stripped the last of the colorful leaves from the trees. I remember because I was worried about Leo walking home from school in it. Arthur had taken the car to get its tires changed, so I couldn't pick him up. I busied myself in the kitchen, baking chocolate chip cookies, the way my David had loved them. The house filled with a warm, sweet smell, a temporary shield against the gloom outside. The phone rang at 3:15 p.m. Leo should have been home by 3:10. My heart gave a little lurch. It was the school secretary. "Mrs. Carter? I'm just calling to check on Leo. He wasn't in class this afternoon. We have him marked as absent after lunch." The floor seemed to drop away beneath me. Absent? No, that's not possible. He went to school this morning. I packed his lunch myself. I've double-checked our attendance records, ma'am. He was marked present this morning, but he did not return after the lunch break. We assumed he was unwell, and you had come to collect him. A cold dread, sharper than any ice, began to spread through my veins. No, I didn't. Has anyone called? Did he say anything to his friends? We're checking with his classmates now. We'll call you back immediately if we hear anything. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking so violently I could barely dial Arthur's number. I told him, my voice a high, panicked threat. He said he was leaving the garage immediately. Call the police, Evie. Now. I was about to dial 911 when the phone rang again. It was a man's voice, deep and calm, with a gentle, pastoral tone. "Mrs. Carter? My name is Reverend Michaels. I'm the pastor at St. Jude's Church over on Elm Street." St. Jude's? That was clear across town. We weren't members. Why was he calling? Yes? Hello? What is it? I begged, my politeness gone, replaced by raw terror. "I have your grandson here with me, Mrs. Carter." A couple brought him to the church steps about an hour ago. An older gentleman and lady. They said they were his great-grandparents. They said you knew he was here, that it was all arranged. They told him he was waiting for you. But he's been sitting here in the rain for some time, and he's very upset. He gave me your number. The world stopped. The rain outside, the smell of burning cookies, the sound of my own breath, everything ceased to exist. I saw only one image, my Leo, my 8-year-old boy, abandoned on the cold, wet steps of a church by his own great-grandparents. Is he okay? I choked out. He's cold and wet and very frightened. But he's safe now. He's here in my office with a warm blanket. I'm on my way. Please tell him I'm coming. Tell him Nana is coming right now. I don't remember the drive. I must have called Arthur, must have told him to meet me at the church. It's all a blur of rain-smeared windshields and the frantic hammering of my own heart. I skidded to a stop in the church parking lot, flung the car door open, and ran towards the old stone building. And there, in the doorway of the parish office, stood Reverend Michaels. And beside him, wrapped in a gray wool blanket that was far too big for him, was Leo. His face was pale and streaked with tears, his hair plastered to his forehead. His small shoulders were shaking. "Leo," I cried, rushing forward and dropping to my knees, pulling him into my arms. He clung to me, his small body trembling violently. "Nana," he sobbed into my neck, his voice muffled and broken. "They left me. Great-grandpa and great-grandma. They said you were too old and I was a burden. They said you didn't want me anymore. They told me to wait on the steps for you, but you didn't come." Each word was a shard of glass in my heart. I held him tighter, rocking him back and forth, whispering promises I knew I had to keep. "I will always want you, my darling boy. Always. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Nana would never, ever leave you." I looked up at Reverend Michaels, my own tears now mixing with the rain on my face. His expression was one of profound pity and anger. "They told him a story," the Reverend said quietly. "They told him it was a surprise, that they were taking him for a treat. They drove him here, walked him up to the steps, and told him to be a big boy and wait for you. They said you'd be along shortly. Then they got in their car and drove away." The calculated cruelty of it was beyond comprehension. They hadn't just abandoned him, they had weaponized his trust. They had made him believe, for that terrifying hour in the rain, that I had rejected him, that he was unwanted, unloved, a burden. Arthur arrived then, his face ashen. He saw Leo in my arms, and the relief that flooded his features was quickly replaced by a rage I had never seen in him before. He took Leo from me, holding him close, whispering to him, his own body trembling not from cold, but from a furious, helpless grief. We took our boy home. We ran him a warm bath, put him in his favorite pajamas, and tucked him into bed, even though it was only late afternoon. We sat on either side of him, holding his hands, until he finally, exhaustedly, fell into a fitful sleep. His breathing was still hitching with the remnants of sobs. Downstairs, in our quiet kitchen, Arthur and I sat at the table. The burned cookies sat in the pan, a bitter monument to the normal afternoon that had been stolen from us. We didn't speak for a long time. There were no words adequate for the betrayal we were feeling. Finally, Arthur looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "They tried to break him, Evie. To prove their point. To show us we couldn't handle it. They tried to break our family." I nodded, a cold, hard knot of resolve forming in the pit of my stomach. The grief for my parents was gone, burned away in the fire of this new, righteous anger. In its place was a steely determination. "They failed," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. "They underestimated us. They underestimated love." But as I sat there in the gathering darkness, I knew the wound they had inflicted on Leo was deep. The fear of abandonment, the seed of doubt they had planted in his little heart, that would be the real battle. The war was not over. It had just begun. And the battlefield was the soul of an 8-year-old boy who had now been left behind twice in his short life. The days that followed Leo's abandonment were the longest of my life. The physical child was home, safe in his bed, but the happy, trusting boy we knew had retreated somewhere deep inside himself. He had nightmares that would wrench him from sleep, leaving him screaming and disoriented. He became my shadow, clinging to my sweater, following me from room to room, his eyes wide with a constant, unspoken anxiety. If I went to the bathroom, he would sit outside the door. If the phone rang, he would jump, his little body tensing with fear. The school was wonderful, understanding. We told them there had been a family emergency, which was the stark, terrible truth. But we couldn't shield him from the world forever. The first time we had to drop him off at school again, it was a scene of pure heartbreak. He wrapped his arms around my legs, sobbing, begging me not to leave him. "Please, Nana, don't make me stay. They said you wouldn't come back. They said it." I knelt down, holding his tear-stained face in my hands. "Leo, listen to me. Look at me. What they said was a lie. A terrible, wicked lie. I will always, always come back for you. Do you understand me? Always. This I promise you." It took the principal and his kind-hearted teacher gently prying him from me. I walked back to the car, got inside, and wept until I felt sick. The image of his terrified face in the school doorway was seared into my mind. This was the true cost of my parents' actions. This was the inheritance they had left him, a legacy of fear. Arthur and I knew we needed help. We found a gentle, soft-spoken child therapist named Dr. Anna Flores. Leo was hesitant at first, but she had a way with him, using toys and drawings to help him give voice to the terror he couldn't articulate. After his third session, she sat down with Arthur and me. "He's carrying a tremendous burden," she said, her voice filled with a professional compassion. "He's internalized the narrative that he is a burden, that his presence causes trouble and leads to people leaving. He believes, on some level, that he was responsible for his parents' death, and now that he caused the rift with his great-grandparents. It's a devastating weight for a child." Hearing it laid out so clearly was like being physically struck. "How do we help him?" Arthur asked, his voice thick. "You counter the narrative," she said. "Not just with words, but with unwavering, predictable action. You prove to him, every single hour of every single day, that he is wanted, that he is loved, that he is safe. You will need to be patient. Healing from a betrayal of this magnitude is not a straight line. It's a long, slow journey." So, we began the long, slow journey. We established new routines, rituals of safety. We created a promise jar where every day, Leo and I would write down a small promise to each other on a slip of paper. "I promise to read you a story tonight. I promise to help you with your puzzle." And we would keep them without fail. We were building a new foundation, one small, colored slip of paper at a time. I also had my own battle to fight. The rage inside me was a cold, hard stone. I wanted to confront my parents. I wanted to scream at them, to make them understand the devastation they had wrought. I found out the name of their retirement community in Florida. I dialed the number more than once, my finger hovering over the call button, my heart pounding with a toxic mix of fury and pain. But I never pressed it. What would it achieve? They would never apologize. They would only justify their actions, reinforcing the very narrative we were trying to heal. Speaking to them would be like pouring poison back into our lives. Instead, I did the only thing I had the power to do. I went to the small, cold storage unit where I kept a few family items. There, tucked away in a cardboard box, was the velvet box containing the Royal Albert teapot. My mother had left it behind after our confrontation, a final, silent testament to my disobedience. I took it home. I didn't put it on a shelf. I set it on the kitchen table. Leo watched me, his eyes curious. "What's that, Nana?" "This," I said, my voice steady, "is a story about what not to be." I opened the box. The teapot gleamed, its pink roses as perfect and cold as ever. This belonged to my mother. She thought it was the most important thing in the world. She thought it was more important than people. More important than family. More important than you. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. I carried it to the back garden, Leo trailing behind me. Arthur came out, a question in his eyes. I didn't answer him. I walked to the center of the lawn, raised the teapot high above my head, and with a cry that came from the very depths of my soul, I hurled it down onto the flagstone path. It shattered. 100 pieces of bone china, 1,000 shards of pink rose and gold, skittering across the stones. The sound was immensely satisfying. It was the sound of a chain breaking. Leo stared at the fragments, his eyes wide. Then he looked up at me. "It's broken," he whispered. "Yes," I said, kneeling down to his level, my hands on his shoulders. "And we're not. We are stronger than China, Leo. Love is stronger than pride. This is just a thing. You are everything." A slow, tentative smile touched his lips. It was the first real smile I had seen on his face in weeks. It was like the sun coming out from behind a storm cloud. That was the turning point. Not immediately and not all at once. But slowly, like a plant turning towards the light, Leo began to come back to us. The nightmares became less frequent. The shadow in his eyes began to lift. He started to laugh again, that wonderful, uninhibited laugh that was the true music of our home. He began to trust that when we said we would be there, we meant it. Months turned into a year. We celebrated his 9th birthday in the backyard with a pirate theme and chocolate cake. He blew out the candles, his face glowing with joy, surrounded by his friends from school. Arthur and I watched from the porch, his arm around my shoulders. We were older, yes. Our hair was grayer, our steps a little slower. but our hearts were full in a way they hadn't been since we lost David. One evening, as I was tucking Leo into bed, he looked up at me, his face serious in the dim light from the hallway. "Nana," he said. "Yes, my love. I'm glad you chose me." The words were so simple, so profound, they stole the breath from my lungs. He knew. In his child's heart, he had understood the choice I had been forced to make that day. Tears filled my eyes, but they were clean tears, tears of healing. I smoothed the hair back from his forehead. "Leo," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Listen to me. I will choose you every single time. I chose you over a teapot. I would choose you over every treasure in the world. You are not a burden. You are the greatest gift I have ever been given. You are my boy." He smiled, a sleepy, contented smile, and closed his eyes. I sat there for a long time, watching him sleep, listening to his steady, peaceful breathing. The ghosts of the past had not been entirely banished. The memory of my parents' betrayal and the aching loss of David and Sarah would always be a part of our story, a faint scar on our hearts. But they no longer defined us. We had built something new from the wreckage. We had taken the shattered pieces of a teapot, of a family, of a little boy's trust, and we had carefully, lovingly, glued them back together with patience and unwavering devotion. The cracks would always be there, visible if you knew where to look. But what we had created was not fragile. It was not China. It was stronger, more resilient, and more beautiful for having been broken. It was a family, reforged in the fires of loss and betrayal, and it was finally whole.